Up next here, SportsCenter continues over on ESPN News.
Have a good weekend.
Still undefeated, Magomed Abdusalamov.
He was an undefeated Russian heavyweight, and in the time-honored phrase, he could have been a contender.
He wanted to be world champion. It meant everything to him.
But in the moments after a brutal fight, his first loss, Magomed Abdusalamov was already complaining to doctors.
I said, blanket test, take him to the hospital. And this kid tells him his head hurts.
So at any time did a doctor post-fight suggest that you should go to the hospital that night?
No.
You have at least 4 doctors and a referee there. Their sole purpose in being there is to guard this guy's safety.
To single this out as a negligence problem, I don't think is correct. It's part of the risk.
Today, Outside the Lines, in the painful minutes after a devastating loss, was enough done to protect the health of this fighter.
And now, reporting for Outside the Lines, Bob Lee.
Questions have always swirled around boxing. Some of them are age-old and conventional. Where are the next contenders coming from, especially in the lackluster heavyweight division? Russian fighter Magomed Abdusalamov was poised to stake his claim, rolling along undefeated, climbing towards a title shot. But the other questions around the sport, especially in this new age of enhanced concussion awareness, those questions now frame Abdusalamov's story, and they are chillingly basic. Even at the top levels of the sport, is enough being done to protect the health of fighters? Given that last November, hours after a fight at Madison Square Garden, this heavyweight was clinging to life in a Manhattan hospital. The question is, did the sports system of emergency medical care fail him when he needed it the most? John Barr chronicles this tragic story.
Straight left hand, and now Mago is teeing off. Oh, right at the bell, and a huge, huge shot.
18 fights, 18 knockouts, 11 in the first round.
Still undefeated, Magomed Abdusalamov.
He wanted to be world champion. It meant everything to him. And he was doing everything in his power to become just that.
Magomed Abdusalamov's quest to be world heavyweight champion landed him a November 2nd Madison Square Garden matchup with undefeated Mike Perez.
I promise good fight Saturday night. Thank you.
A devout Muslim, the 32-year-old Abdusalamov is the father of 3 young daughters with his wife, Bakanai.
He spends a lot of time with his little girls. He loves them dearly.
He's also a hero in his homeland, the Russian Republic of Dagestan.
He had big plans for when we returned home after his fighting. According to Islam, you should help others, believe in the Almighty, and be a good person. And he tried his best to be all those things.
Abdusalamov entered the ring knowing that if he could beat the Cuban-born Perez, a title shot could be just one bout away. But in the first round, an ominous sign. A forearm that might have been the shot that broke a bone in his face. The illegal blow could have ended the fight, with the referee ruling it a no contest. But that didn't happen.
He came back to the corner and he thought his nose was broken because he kept saying, my nose. And I told him, relax, nothing, because I couldn't tell that moment was broken or not.
Abdusalamov also broke his left hand. Outside the Line spoke with his 4 cornermen, his opponent, Mike Perez, and a state athletic commission inspector.
They went to war for 10 rounds and never stopped, throwing punches.
I spent the entire night throwing the same punch, and he never did something to stop it. So he received hits where the damage was already done.
What nobody knew as Abdusalamov withstood 312 blows, many to the left side of his head, is that he sustained a devastating head injury. At some point, Abdusalamov's brain started bleeding. Left untreated, it would have killed him.
Although it can't be seen clearly, because he is a strong fighter and I respect him, he was receiving lots of painful hits and complaining. I kept on thinking they would stop the fight.
Abdusalamov's corner, referee Benji Estevez Jr., and the State Athletic Commission doctors on duty that night could have stopped the fight, but no one did.
Was there ever any discussion in the corner about should this fight be stopped?
Around the 7th round, I said, you know what, I may stop this fight. I may stop it. But the very next round, he came back to fight even harder.
Magomed was taking a lot of punches. He was also giving a lot of punches. He was not showing any signs of not being able to defend himself.
Abdusalamov went the distance, losing a unanimous 10-round decision. His handlers and others who saw him say he was coherent as State Commission doctors examined his badly swollen face and a cut over his left eye. Later, in the dressing room, the doctors gave him a neurological exam, requiring him to read a series of numbers.
I said, blanket test, take him to the hospital. And this kid tells him his head hurts. He wants this kid to go through the standard procedure of counting these numbers to see how he feels.
He knew that something was wrong with his head. He said, "Is there a painkiller I could take to lessen the pain?"
And I got kind of mad, and I walked out for about 2 minutes. And I told Chico, I can't take it, man, because they're just BSing with this kid.
After the first doctor was done, the second one came in, and he put in 8 or 9 stitches over his eye.
He says, when you're going back home? And we said, tomorrow. He said, when you get back home, get it checked out. I think his nose is broken.
The doctor said, check him in a day or two.
In a day or two?
Yeah.
So at any time did a doctor post-fight suggest that you should go to the hospital that night?
No. No.
We did not know that there was any kind of head injury at that point. He was showing no signs of any trouble.
Was there a sense of urgency?
At that point, no. At that point, no.
After clearing Abdusalamov, doctors left the dressing room. That's when State Inspector Matt Ferrego says he collected a urine sample and found blood, a possible sign of internal bleeding. Ferrego says he then told Abdusalamov's handlers to get him to the hospital that night. But the doctors didn't put him in an ambulance, even though at least one was on standby. With fans streaming onto the sidewalks of bustling Midtown Manhattan, Abdusalamov and his camp were left to find a taxi to an emergency room.
I couldn't find any taxis. Everybody's full. I kept flagging them down. It took, I don't know how long, good 15, 20 minutes for me to even catch a taxi.
Critical minutes were slipping by for Abdusalamov, who, according to his handlers, was faint, unable to walk on his own, and throwing up before finally reaching the hospital.
This right here is a very large blood clot on the surface of his brain. It's a surgical emergency.
Dr. Rapendra Swarup is the director of the neurosurgical ICU at Mount Sinai Roosevelt Hospital, where the challenge for doctors was to limit the damage to Abdusalamov's brain.
Had he not been operated on, would he have been brain dead?
Of course, absolutely. We managed to salvage, I think, a significant amount, but there's also significant damage. There's significant damage.
2 hours after the final bell of the fight, Abdusalamov had a brain scan, then was rushed into surgery. A large blood clot was pushing his brain against his skull and caused multiple strokes. Doctors removed the left side of his skull to relieve the pressure, and they reduced the swelling of his brain. But Abdusalamov was left in a coma.
5 in the morning, I get a call from his promoter. He says, Mago's in the hospital. All right, I presume. I say, yeah, so he's okay. He says, no, he's in a coma. And I got weak. And
I start crying. I'm thinking about his kids. And I feel bad for his family, man, because here's the guy who's a loving wife and kids at home, beautiful family. I just want to pray that he makes it so he can play with his kids and walk and talk with them and just have a life where they can be together.
Dr. Barry Jordan, the longtime chief medical officer of the State Athletic Commission, was at the fight that night, in charge of the doctors assigned to it. Neither Jordan nor the other doctors would comment to Outside the Lines, but their handling of Abdusalamov is just one of the things now being investigated by the state.
You have at least 4 doctors and a referee there. Their sole purpose in being there is to guard this guy's safety.
Paul Edelstein is an attorney who's been hired by Abdusalamov's family.
They're essentially lifeguards watching a pool with only 2 swimmers in it. And they're only supposed to be watching these 2 swimmers and ensuring that these guys are safe. How did one of them drown?
How will you look back on this fight?
It was a great fight. Fighters have been lost in the past. Athletes have been lost in the past. To single this out as a negligence problem, I don't think is correct. It happened. It has happened in boxing. It will happen in boxing and other sports. It's part of the risk.
Under the circumstances, should there have been more urgency in getting him to the hospital?
I would say yes. If there's any question that there's an intracranial injury from any trauma, the patient needs to go to the hospital, they need to go to the emergency room ASAP.
Abdusalamov was in a coma for weeks before being moved to this rehab facility on Christmas Eve. He's shown slight movement and can follow simple commands, but he remains bedridden and may never be able to walk, talk, or hold his daughters again.
If they had stopped the fight, or at the very least taken him to the hospital right away, maybe his injuries wouldn't be so severe. It's still surreal to us. He's such a strong, joyful person in life. But now, he's just lying there, helpless.
John Barr reporting, along with producer Willie Weinbaum. Outside the Lines sought comment on Abdusalamov's fight and the aftermath from referee Benji Estevez and the chairwoman of the State Athletic Commission. Each initially declined comment, but last Friday, the State Athletic Commission issued this statement saying its primary concern is the health and safety of its licensed athletes. Quote, "We rely on a comprehensive framework of laws, regulations, and policies to ensure their safety." Due to the questions raised, the Secretary of State requested that the New York State Inspector General conduct a full review of the facts and circumstances surrounding the November 2nd fight. Late last month, Magomed Abdusalamov had a synthetic material inserted into his head. It replaced the portion of his skull removed to relieve the pressure on his brain. Let's talk about the issues raised here. Let's say good day to Dr. Paul Wallace. He is the chief ringside physician and the medical chairman for the California State Athletic Commission. Dr. Anthony Alessi has been with us before on the topic of concussions. He is a neurologist. He also serves as a ring physician. And Thomas Hauser, the noted boxing author, has looked into this bout as well and reported on it. It is good to have you gentlemen all here. Dr. Alessi, there are a lot of ways to ask this question, a lot of ways to parse it, but it basically comes down to what went wrong, if anything.
Well, Bob, it seems like a lot of things went wrong, and it wasn't just one event that happened. As pointed out in John Barr's great piece, there were several different layers of protection that are provided to fighters, and unfortunately, none of those worked the way they should. Mr. Edelstein's analogy of 2 people swimming and 1 drowning, you know, that's an oversimplification, because don't forget, Mr. Abdusalamov was still fighting. So it's like 2 swimmers, but they're both still swimming. So this is a tough judgment, especially with the injury. With bleeding in the brain, it's not something you can see with your eye. So there's a lot that has to be done in order to make that diagnosis. So there are a lot of things that went wrong that night, and Tom Hauser pointed that out in his piece as well.
Dr. Wallace, even admitting that some people chose not to speak to us, but we heard from his seconds who were in the dressing room about his complaints. What is your take from what you've learned?
Well, it's a little bit difficult being able to actually say what went on. I didn't speak to any of the people who were involved, but I certainly know New York quite well. They had the one of the best ringside physician trainings that go on, and those doctors, at least 3 of the doctors that were there, collectively, they probably have about 40 or 50 years of ringside experience. I think that the story also changes. I know that here in California, having worked for the last 25 years, stories certainly do change once a boxer is hurt. My condolences certainly go out with regards to the family. I'm certainly sorry that that happens, but this is the hurt sport, and we have to be very much aware of that.
Okay,
I
Thomas?
think that the protocol that they have in terms of being seen, and my understanding that he was seen by at least 3, if not 4 doctors along the way, and it doesn't quite gel with how the outcome ended up with the boxer not being sent to the hospital. I think the story may have changed as we see the consequences of the evening.
All right, Thomas, you've looked into this as well. Even granted, if stories change because of the emotion and the retrospective nature of this, and that blood bleeds are tough to diagnose, perhaps, you've looked into this. And in your mind, I know that you've written this, that even from round 1 on, there were moments in the boxing formation there that there was an ability to stop this fight, and not just from the ring physician.
There are 2 issues. The first is whether or not the fight should have been stopped. The second issue is whether the aftercare was appropriate. And my concern is that while there are a number of very good, dedicated, capable public servants at the New York State Athletic Commission, in recent years, a culture of not caring about medical issues has grown. You see it in allowing a fighter like Eric Morales, who twice tested positive for illegal PEDs, to fight. You saw it in the mishandling of the Miguel Cotto-Antonio Margarito fight and the Miguel Cotto-Yuri Foreman fight. Here, if you take New York State Athletic Commission personnel at their word, using their version of events, after the fight, they told Abdusalamov to go to the hospital, and they said, take a taxi. Now, if Carmelo Anthony had his nose splattered all over his face in a basketball game, somebody wouldn't say to him, go take a shower and then grab a cab to the hospital. If you want a fighter to go to the hospital, you send him in an ambulance. They didn't do that. And that's taking the New York State Athletic Commission personnel at their word.
Dr. Wallace?
Well, there's a major difference between something being an emergency, something being an urgency, or something that can be taken care of 24, 48, or a week later. And having a broken nose, and even, I don't know the extent of all the injuries that happen, but anything that's on the outside certainly doesn't compare to what's on the inside. So a broken nose, even a fractured facial bone, there was a ophthalmologist that checked, so they saw that there was no trapping in the eye, there was no problem associated with that. And I had an opportunity, in fact, Thomas and I have had a long relationship, read several books, think that he's a gifted author, but I think the opinion is biased on the fact that there may not be any caring with regards to this. The way that I've, both in reading his article and looking at the other reports that are there, I think the physicians followed the protocol that was most proper. Now, the issue with the delayed bleed, and I'm sure that that can be spoken on, is extremely difficult. Whether it's 2 hours later, 2 days later, we've seen instances all the time. In terms of the fight being stopped, I worked a fight earlier last year, and I think it was the fight of the year, the Bradley-Provodnikov fight. And if you take a look at Provodnikov, his face was certainly swollen. I don't say that it was grotesque, but the one who went to the hospital was Bradley, who looked just fine. But that's because he had signs of neurological deficits.
Dr. Alessi, what do you think we just heard?
Well, I disagree with Tom in the sense that I don't think we have a culture of not caring, at least speaking for ringside physicians. You know, our job is to be their advocate. That's the only job there. We're not there making a lot of money. Our point is to be advocates for them. It failed in this case, but I can't say that it's not from not caring. And as I pointed out earlier, subdural hemorrhages are very difficult to diagnose. You don't have this X-ray vision or a CT scanner right there. And it can present so many different ways. The case in point being Natasha Richardson. Here's someone who had an epidural hemorrhage. She went back to a ski lodge, prepared a meal, had a meal, and then suddenly died. That's how these behave. This is every ringside physician's nightmare. That's what we're looking at here.
Tom?
No, well, yeah, except that the problem in New York is the system fails again and again and again. And you can run a red light, you can go out driving and run a red light 10 or 15 times and get away with it, and finally there's a truck. You saw it at Yankee Stadium when Yuri Foreman fought Miguel Cotto. Foreman's knee went out. He kept falling down. His corner wanted to stop the fight, and throwing 100 years of history out the window, the referee wouldn't let them stop the fight, and the commission doctors and the commissioners sat there just looking on, doing nothing, until Yuri Foreman was beaten down. That was outrageous. Suppose Yuri Foreman suffered a subdural hematoma in that fight. Here, everybody agrees. If you listen to the commission doctors themselves say that this man should have gone to the hospital. I passed within 3 feet of Magomed after the fight. I was walking down to the ring as he was walking past. His face looked awful. It was disfigured. There were broken bones. You don't say to him, take a shower and grab a cab to the hospital, which is what the commission doctors are saying. You take him to the hospital in an ambulance. That didn't happen. Why was Eric Morales allowed to fight after he had tested positive twice for illegal PEDs? Why wasn't the Yuri Foreman fight stopped? There are some very good, capable physicians at the New York State Athletic Commission.
You've got 30 seconds. Let me give Dr. Wallace a chance to respond. 30 seconds, Doctor.
Well, I think that the emotion with regards to the boxing game itself is playing a large part in what's happening now. However, again, what you saw on the face is I see it every week. I've done over 5,000 fights, and we commonly see facial swelling, cuts on the eyes. That has nothing to do with what's necessarily going on inside his head. From what I've read and from what I've heard, there was no neurological sign showing that this bleed was happening. The concern that Tom seems to really have is the fact that his face was swollen. Well, that's not an emergency, and oftentimes fighters
it'll be, of course,
go home.
Looked into by the Inspector General
No,
of the
my
state of
concern is that there were broken bones in his face.
We're presently out of time.
Broken
Dr.
bones
Paul
aren't
Wallace,
an emergency.
Dr. Tony Alessi, Thomas Hauser, a lot of facts to talk about and to discuss. Thank you so much. For more of the questions about the way this boxer was treated in the critical minutes and hours after his fight, log on and read the outstanding piece by John Barr and Willie Weinbaum on ESPN.com. We step aside. We're coming back.